Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. I'm super excited to have you on with us live to share this visit with Dominique Munoz. I first met Dominic at Virginia Commonwealth University when we were both working in the photography department. And then I kind of lost touch, and it's kind of crazy. Instagram just kind of popped your work back up on my feed, and I was like, oh, whoa, like this is wild. And I started looking at your work on your portfolio site, and it really had shifted from what I had known all those years back. And I love like the dimension, and it's funny that like your next gig, I guess, you're talking about the intersection of craft and photography, and I really see that in your work in an exciting way. And sometimes I feel like photo can be flat, and so I like the dimensionality that your work has taken. Hang on, we have one more person joining. Anyway, so I think you're a perfect fit to chat with us as we're such like a mixed group. So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dominic.
Perfect. Thanks, Dana. And thanks for inviting me, and thank you all for joining and hanging out and hearing me share my practice. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen
Thank you.
and do that like awkward thing where now you're all seeing what I'm perfect. Everyone can see Dana, you're all good, can see my screen,
I
hear
can,
me.
yes.
Perfect,
Can see
beautiful.
it.
Um, my name is Dominique Munoz. Yeah, just hop right into it. Um, a little bit about me. That is me on the right as a baby.
Aw, baby
I'm
Dominic.
from I'm from Falls Church, Virginia, born and raised. Currently living in Provincetown, Massachusetts. So people always make a little fist and describe it that way. I don't really understand that, but people do it every time I'm here. I got my BFA in photo and film from Virginia Commonwealth University in 2015. And then I recently got my MFA in studio art at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in May of 2025. So you'll notice there's like a 10-year gap between those degrees, which I think also goes to, well, I'll go through in my talk of kind of my experience as an artist and photographer and how that has shifted since. So when I was first an undergrad, I worked at this Greek deli called Nick's. It was done by two Greek brothers. And there was an assignment where I had to, for my darkroom class, where I had to photograph a roll of film the next day and then bring it in to class the following day to develop and stuff. And so, but I had to work the next day, like 8 to like 5 p.m. And then I had a night class. So I was like, well, so I asked my boss, can I bring my camera to work? And he was like, you could only photo, he was really strict. He's like, you could only photograph when no one's there. So I said, okay. This eventually turned into me documenting them for 3 years, as during like our in between our lunch rushes and just kind of catching the moments in between. And I grew this appreciation for the deli and for the people and my coworkers themselves and how they kind of treated me as family, especially at a time in college where it was my first time ever leaving home and home felt so strange, but it felt nice to step away and outside of the university and enter the Richmond community at a larger sense and through the vessel of this deli that was a staple in Richmond and people used to come all the time to come grab lunches. So this is kind of some of the work that ended up being my thesis show in undergrad. That's my cash register on the left, and that's my boss on the right. So I really, there was not that much natural light other than like the front like window. So I was really kind of limited to like where I was photographing in the space, but it helped dictate kind of like where I was kind of pointing my camera. And then I learned like location lighting and I got really excited about that. And so I would ask my coworkers at the end of the day if I could photograph them outside using like strobes and flashes. And I was thinking a lot about like Greek culture, then like Greek warriors, and so I was thinking about like battle scars from like them being at the deli, but in their gloves and their own like armor, and focusing in on those like the torso, and then my morning coffee cup, what you see on the right, but in certain light, it also kind of resembled a little Greek column. So it was like, oh, cute, cute, fun nod. this is how I ended up presenting the work for my thesis exhibition. A round of photographs on the wall. And then I had these like two interesting moments where the people over here on the left, I used to photograph also on my phone all the time. And I had someone one time and be like, you need to pick one camera and only one camera, like digital, film, or your cell phone. And I was like, I don't think so. Like my phone I used to like sketch and my film, my digital, they're just I approached him differently and I really ignored him, but he really was trying to like adamant about me picking one camera. And what ended up being was, oh, the pictures on the left in this little thing were all my cell phone photos. And I wanted to resemble or like recreate the same experience when people were looking for spices at the deli. So it would flicker through, I would hand bag spices every day, or so I would have people would flick through in alphabetical order to find like dill and like pull them out. And I kind of wanted to recreate that similar experience, but with my cell phone photos. And so I created that little shelf. And then on the right, there's a brown bag, and in it is filled with black beans. And buried in the black beans is a speaker. And what I did was I recorded laughter in the deli throughout my times, all my like voice memos. And so I called it Laughing Beans, and thinking about how this space also brought laughter and community to it. And so I just kind of sampled laughter. There's an audio piece, obviously, where the girl standing right here, and it's my boss explaining philotimo, which became the title of this piece, which is this Greek term that has no direct translation, but is the binding undercurrent that kind of unites humanity. And I really appreciated that sensibility, and it's something I really stick to and believe. But this way of working, this way of thinking, led me post graduation to this amazing residency at Clark Construction, where I became the inaugural photographer in residence for this construction company. They were basically looking for someone to photograph the art of building. And they're like, take that idea and run with it. But we really loved what you did for the deli and like how you approach that and that humanity and like the details. And but we want you to use all of our construction sites around the country as a playground and as like that stage for you to work. And so for a year and a half, I traveled all across the country to all the different construction sites. They are a major construction company, and they have lots of like subsidiaries, like their own concrete company, their own electrical, they do like metro work. And so that kind of like started off this journey where I was now working on construction sites, got OSHA 20 certified, and I would email project managers and I would learn like how sites were actually being built and what stages they were in. And I would become interested in certain phases. And then I would travel out there to those spots. I realized that on the East Coast, they did a lot more concrete work. And so I became really interested in the concrete aspects of construction on the East Coast, where on the West Coast, a lot more steel happens, a lot more steel workers are on site, thinking a lot about the construction, the landscape, and the sometimes the natural disasters that happen. And we'll get to one of my favorite job sites in an image, and you'll see in a bit. But I'm going to kind of flicker through some images I made during my time. I loved welders. You weren't supposed to like stare at the light for too long, but I was like, this is amazing. And that the image on the right with the welder is now a concert venue, one of my favorite concert venues in DC. So it was cool to be in those spaces before they were even something, and then getting to experience it as, a customer, a citizen.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah.
This was in a quarry in Atlanta, Georgia, where they were expanding the clean water from 5 days, their emergency reservoir of clean water from 5 days to 35 days. And they drained this quarry. And this quarry was actually used in Stranger Things, Hunger Games, and the Fast and Furious. And when they were excavating and draining the quarry, they actually found one of the doors from Fast and Furious. And the workers tried to sell it on eBay. I'm not sure if they actually made any money, but that was like the fun
Wait, like
fact they told
like
me.
a car door?
Yeah, because they would when they were like filming stunts from Fast and the Furious, and I guess
Yeah.
when they would like pop doors off, and I don't know, but
They just left it.
it was at the bottom of the quarry when they drained it.
That's epic.
And so I rode a Loki into this tunnel area with the workers and hung out with them for like 3 days, 4 days, and just kind of watched and explored as they were doing this. I, of course, was also really interested in the kind of makeshift break rooms or like temporary spaces that these workers were making, especially thinking back to the Greek deli where most of the times when I was photographing was during our downtimes and when we were kind of sitting and relaxing. And so I saw these kind of moments where the workers would get a nail, hammer it in, and not hang their lunch boxes and just come back to gather in these moments. This was in Seattle. They were expanding, I think, the metro system out there. I really like these like interesting combinations of like human machine really coming together to do one task. This is my favorite job site. This was at the top of Salesforce Tower in San Francisco. I went to work with the steel workers because was photographing them along their journey. And they were crowning out. This was the last beams to the top of the tower. And when I got there, they asked me if I wanted to get in a harness and climb up with them. And I said, sure. I'm terrified of heights. This is 61 stories in the air. And I was like, when am I ever going to get this opportunity to climb up with some steel workers and like watch them like lock in these last beams? And at this moment in time in 2017, this was the tallest building to the west of the Mississippi. So I was like, oh wow, that's amazing. That's me right there in the little highlighter vest, high vis vest, holding on for my dear life. I had 2 points of like latch points on that ladder, but also my arm was wrapped around the back, holding on because the wind also up there was intense.
Is that ladder what you climbed up to get to that point?
It is.
Oh dear
Not
God.
61 stories, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
below that is like a floor, so it's like 2 stories. But yeah, so I had to climb that, and as I was climbing, I had to manually remove, like unhook myself and hook myself onto the next ring, and to the next ring, like I was like rock climbing or something. Palms sweating, shaky. Even thinking about it still, I'm like, and then I was up there for an hour, and eventually they told me I had to come down because it was kind of dangerous what I was up there doing because they were like by my feet. Um, all this to say, all throughout my time there, this ended up being my first solo exhibition at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C., where I got to work and display my work with the curator, got to design like how the walls were protruding out. I even did laser engravings on wood, and they framed all my work for me, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. That time eventually, though, had to end. I was only the residency was only supposed to be a year. They added like 4 more months to it, and then it's a still continuous residency program, and so I think they're on their fifth photographer now that they just ended his show, but they bring a new photographer every year to approach the same kind of idea and explore it. So if people are ever interested, look into it. It is 1906 Group is the group. Clark Construct. They own Clark Construction and all these people. But yeah, but through this show is actually how I ended up meeting my next employer, the people who actually framed my work. It was this company called Framebridge, where they were a picture framing company that was direct to consumer. And 6 months after I left Clark, they were looking for an in-house photographer. So I applied. I wanted to really work on my artificial lighting skills, like the studio lighting, and I really wanted to just kind of be in a commercial space. I thought that was going to be kind of like my end all, like career goal, and just like work in this kind of mode of making. But so from 2018 to 2022, I was Framebridge's in-house photographer, where I worked on like multiple national campaigns from set design to editing. And over the years, I developed the company's visual brand identity as they began to open up retail locations because before they were just online service. And when I joined, they were starting to open up retail stores. So I helped physically design them, photograph them, and come up with the whole visual brand identity. I worked with a small creative team with like three graphic designers, and I kind of played. I wore multiple hats. I was a set designer. I ordered frames, samples from the factory, worked with the factory to make sure they got to us. I was a lighting designer. I artificially lit all these sets. I edited them, and then I had to manage all these assets for the company so they could use them across all marketing campaigns and internal slide decks and stuff. It was a lot of work. And yeah, I was really, really excited though, and being able to practice all my artificial lighting techniques. And I was like building sets, and I got to frame all my images that I was like photographing kind of just like from like my personal life, giving get frames as gifts. Eventually my family got annoyed and they're like, no more frames, no more holes in the wall. Please stop. My dad hates holes in the wall. And I'm like, it's easy to patch. But yeah, so I did that for 3 years. And then so in 2022, right before that, obviously that was during the pandemic. And during the pandemic, I even had to work even more solo and by myself. And I just got really, really exhausted. And I ended up moving to Wyoming. My partner at the time was getting his MFA in creative writing, and I saw it as a time where I could move away, work on some freelance stuff if I wanted to, and maybe apply to grad school. And so I moved out to Wyoming, did a little bit of freelance, and kind of just like really looked through all my images that I've been making and like my archives and was like, what am I doing? Like I'm making these images on the side. I'm like sometimes combining artificial lights. I'm also just like really documenting like my house, my parents' house, my grandmother's house. And so I applied to the grad school. And I only told myself that I would only go to grad school if I got into a fully funded program where I didn't have to work and they gave me a stipend. And I was like, I don't want to go in debt. Right now we're in a pandemic and I just don't want to think about that. And so that was my limitation. So I applied to three schools. I got into two. One was a 3 year program, and one was a 2 year program. And I was like, ooh, 3 years, great. More time to make art, have a studio space. But they didn't seem like the right fit for me. And so I ended up going with the 2 year program. And it was really, really, really beneficial. So this is some of the work that I kind of was like, that I had applied to school with. And then I started making a lot. I was thinking a lot about how documentary photography always tries to like, I think, say it's like this like authentic, real image, but a photograph is always constructed. You're always pulling someone to frame them, to position them, the light look right, cropping. So you're always kind of staging something. And I was like kind of really getting to the understanding because I thought being like a National Geographic photographer was like a really cool and amazing. And I thought that was like actual photography. And but then I was like really embracing the stage and the made up and like, but how there's like an emotional truth still to that. And I was then bringing in a lot of my skills from lighting from the commercial aspect of my career and using a lot of that now in my work, but still trying to create this like documentary look, aesthetic. So I was just kind of was like playing and collaborating with my family and looking at all this work, the space around us. This I made when my grandma, around the time like around 2022, she like had to go to the hospital for something, and when she got released from the hospital, there was like a supermoon happening that night, and so we did like a 45-second long exposure. And I was taking an online photo class with Silver Eye and about like world building, just to kind of get myself like back into this like practice for myself. And I was trying to think about how I can do small gestural moves just without bringing like a face or somebody like really like in it. Because I love portraits and I like photographing people. And so I started messing around with these kinds of ways. And the blanket that she's resting her hand on is actually the first blanket that she gave to me when I first left to college. So blankets started making a way into my work. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But this is some work I started making in grad school. I was sketching a lot, just trying to think about what I wanted to like make a cohesive body of work. This I was thinking about like migration practices, and this is my family's like parakeet that I was like had photographed a bunch, and then I cut them out of these like transparencies, and then the birds themselves, I taped them, I like glued them onto these like magnets, and the whole image is actually a magnetic board, so you can move the birds around if you want. And so, but this was like one way that I documented them. And this ended up being in a show at Candela in Richmond. But yeah, so I was like kind of working like that. I was also printing out my photographs and wanting to be more tactile with them. So I started like shredding one of them and then leaving one intact. And then I was thinking a lot about like masks and how we kind of visibility, concealment, ideas like that, and also how our clothing sometimes acts as masks or ways to present ourselves to the outside world of like who we are, who we want to be. So this was something I actually made in Wyoming before I went to grad school, and I was like, "Ooh, this is exciting!" And to be tactile with photography was like really exciting for me. But this language of like the shredding became really important. I was also like printing on like different textures. This was like this like paper doily that I found at a thrift store, thinking about like tablecloths and placemats at our home. And so the images that I was like photographing, that I was like staging, us testing them out and printing them on these doilies. Then I got into this performance piece where I found this like wallpaper that didn't actually work with inkjet printing, and so the ink beat it up, and I would needed 48 hours for it to like dry and settle into the fibers. And so I was thinking about how cultural assimilation kind of happens within the home, and I'm a third generation Guatemalan American, and so watching how my grandmother's house and my parents' house has like kind of conformed to the ways of like a modern aesthetic and HGTV kind of like clean look, and how a lot of the colorful fabrics from my like childhood kind of would get like folded away and like kind of left in the closets. I did this performance piece where for 3.5 minutes I was trying to remove this like a motif, this symbol that I made. I'm not gonna play the whole thing. I'm gonna skip through it, but it's me trying to rub and remove this symbol from this wallpaper. So this was the aftermath of that. The symbol is of a quetzal bird, which is a Guatemalan state bird perched on a holly stem. And so I was thinking about Mayan traditions and Catholicism and how those like kind of converged at some point through colonization, and that became this like motif. There's also this dual aspect of the quetzal bird going extinct in Guatemala as well. So the removing of the quetzal as well is kind of speaking to that extinction of the bird. And then like the physical pain that also like goes into like removing this from the wall, thinking about like, erasure and assimilation practices, how it's kind of like a survival technique as well, but it hurts and it causes burns, at least through this act. So I really got into this paper that I found, and the paper became my mode of making as well. And I was looking through my family's archives and made these kind of like painterly gestures with them, thinking about love and loss through images and how sometimes we photograph the things that are like our happy moments, but we never really photograph the like shadows that really linger, the sad moments that linger behind all these moments. Also, like the ideal family portrait. I'm like, there's complications with people's families. Everyone has this like perfect, picturesque family. And so through my like hand gestures, I would try to like create an emotional resonance and a way to also like unfix the image, fixed and permanent. But this allowed me to move in a way that unfixed the image. And it specifically started with this image. It's my biological father, who I have no relationship with. But came across this image and it was like, that man looks like me. That's freaky. I want to remove him from this picture. And so that became a way of working for this body of work. And it was helpful. Going back to grad school, I worked with one of my painting professors, and she helped me think about like bold gestures and not just because at first I was like kind of just like rubbing with my finger, and she was like, it was cute the first time, but now it's looking like bubble figures, like the Michelin Man. And I was like, okay, thank you. And so she was like teaching me like ways to like work that felt more expressive and not just like the same repetition and like minimal, sometimes just like minimal marks. She was like 2 marks, stop. And I was like, okay. I was like, I think I need to do more. And she was like, not always. Like, okay. But all of this was like, I was like, okay, I'm dealing with a lot of like negativity or like sadness, and I wanted to bring more joy into my practice. So self-portraiture became like a thing, and also my family blankets. And at first, my blankets became stiff and like static as like backdrops. And then I was photographing them on their own, and I would kind of a similar way I was doing that mask. I cut them up into strips and started treating them more as thread. And I would cut into the prints themselves and weave them in, thinking kind of like armor. So I was thinking like ancestral armor. That peacock blanket that my grandma's hand was resting on, and that one image makes its way back. I think about peacocking a lot in queer culture, and also the peacock as this like symbol for like masculinity or feminine masculinity. And I was also thinking about like mythology and deities when I was making this piece. And then I had more print fragments and like threads of those strips. And so I wanted to reweave them and think about like how the blankets are actually made and the handwoven abilities of that and like the artisan hands behind all that. And so I photographed a lot of my textiles that my grandma and mother had given me and print them out, shred them, and reweave them, reworking their patterns, unfixing them, doing these like gestures I thought were kind of queer, going against a traditional grain. I was also thinking a lot about how migration practices or how traditions changed through migration practices and how things are never really the same. And so we start blending and changing that up. These ended up becoming wallpapers in my practice. And so this was the first time I installed and made this repetition of a wallpaper where I scanned those little like samples in and then find endless repetitions that I loved. And it made me think a lot about the cartoon animated shows I used to watch as a kid, specifically Digimon. When these kids entered this like space and they went to like the digital world and they would like fall endlessly into this like glitch. And so I kind of was like glitching these textiles in a way. This is called Performance for Camera as Baby. These are my baby portraits. Thinking again how we perform gender, masculinity for the camera, how we're always performing for the camera. So I took my childhood portraits. My mom loved taking pictures of me and also loved taking me to the mall photo studios. And so that way of working, just like thinking about the image, was interesting. So the mask technique comes back in these images. I wanted to do something, a new iteration of this. And so this time I did an open call to the larger queer community and I collected others. And I wanted us to all kind of sit together on this wall as a collective community, sitting against a new blanket, a new texture, a new wallpaper. And in the middle, you'll see my mentor from grad school, which it was so nice to have him in that as well. But yeah, so I opened this up and I asked people, adults, to send me their childhood portraits and kind of told me idea. And then by hand, I reworked them, printed them out, shredded them, and made these masks. And this was displayed at the UNC's museum. Well, wallpapers continues being a thing in my practice. I did this at a summer residency at Oxbow, where I was a fellow there for 3 months. And I combined kind of the things I was thinking about, working on. That place is they have different studios. There's like a glass studio, there's a print studio, there's a sculpture studio. And so I learned how to glass blow as well. So that's what you see on the right side. This is a two-story installation. So when you go upstairs, you come up to this left side. You see that. That's a detail image of the first floor, and that's a Santa type print on a shard of glass. and those are hand blown rocks that I did. And then to the left, you see a detail of like the side of the wallpaper where I was thinking about the tassels in these textiles that I was sampling and how they had these little personalities to them. And so I kind of wanted to do a little nod to that in this installation. And this like was like our fellow showcase. So I felt like it was like low stakes and I had room to explore and experiment. And usually through my experimentation is when I feel like I've like found small language that I've been able to move and can carry on in my practice. You may notice a detail shot from my performance piece on the right side. So sometimes the documentation of things end up becoming new images that get layered into my installations as well. And they're sometimes just like more moments for me, but they I think have like they speak to a larger idea as well. So then I got back to doing those self-portraits and I started photographing in this way, where I would take my self-portraits, but this time I would cut myself out from the images. And so you'll see this is of just the image itself, where I would physically cut myself out from the print and then layer the image against the same textile, but maybe on the back side. And so I had this like space in between the print and the actual backdrop where I could play. And so I would light them with like artificial lights to create like a really deep shadow. And at first I would crop the images. Like when I first made this one, I cropped it because I didn't want to show the like C stand and all the clips. And it was like, oh no, I'm like revealing how I made it. I wanted to like trick people. But when I cropped it, people were like, oh, this is like an easy Photoshop kind of situation. And I was like, no, it's not. And I like that was like kind of frustrating to me. And so I revisited the image and I pulled back and I uncropped it. And I was like, wait, this is actually really powerful. As a kid, I wanted to be a magician growing up. And so illusion was really exciting. And so I really held on to that idea of like a magician never reveals their tricks. And so I thought by cropping, I would like, it was hiding the trick. I was hiding how the illusion was made. In similar way, photography, we cropped to hide all the mechanics of the image making. And I was like, but there's also like a powerful gesture in revealing that trick and when to reveal it and how I reveal it. And so this way of working and exposing the photographic tools became really exciting to me. And then mirrors got involved. So this first one, I was using the headphones to create this like drape. Might be hard to see, but you can kind of see it right in there, where it kind of felt like a shoulder was like present, so you kind of like felt that person. And then I used a mirror, and I'm holding the mirror up behind that same negative space and reflecting textiles that lay or drape behind the camera. So thinking about how I'm basically turning the tool, the mirror on itself, how mirrors are built into cameras as well, and then forcing that on it. So really playing with depth, playing with illusion, spatial illusion. There's no Photoshop tricks in these. I'm not like editing them to create another pattern, but I wanted to just like fill in that silhouette with the patterns, with the blankets that kind of like helped build me up, that wrapped me, that cared for me, that like brought me this like sense of like cultural identity, even if it was from like afar. And the silhouette also becomes a really powerful symbol structure of working because if we think about the history of portraiture and photography, it was pretty violent at times during colonization specifically, and that would like classify, objectify people, like really like categorize them in these spaces to catalog them. And that way of like the camera's gaze, the like way of like trapping kind of that body, the silhouette kind of releases that. It allows the person to still be, it gestures towards the figure without it demanding kind of it's like being subjugated. And I also was thinking about Pokemon, like, name that, who's that Pokemon in the beginning of each episode? And it's just the silhouette. And it's like, you're always like waiting and guessing for that moment. And so the silhouette is like this like really powerful way of working. And also surrealist artists were using that a lot as well. And I love surrealism. So this became my thesis show in grad school. This is how it was installed at Lump Gallery in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I'm gonna take you through some of that work. And yeah, but this was the way we each got like our own space. So I got to do my own solo show there. And to return back to Framebridge, they framed all my stuff for me. And because you should not burn bridges with people unless they do bad, they framed my whole show for me for free. I reached out to them and they're like, they gave me a 100% discount code and they're like, thank you for all the work you've done. We'll frame all your work for you.
That is incredible. Wow.
So this was like a $5,000 job. Like I literally like, added up and they were like, I was like, I want the most expensive hardwood, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, this is, but they were like, whatever, this is fine. Um, so yeah, so this is what the way it was installed. And then I'll show you some more like detail stuff. One of my favorites, my grandma, it's called Peekaboo. This was an accident. I was setting this shot up. The textile is actually draped at the very end of the hallway. And she was going in and out of her kitchen, and she was like peeking out just to make sure the coast was safe. And I was just doing lighting tests, and this one just like really made it. Um, I love it. And you may notice the textile that's in there, and we'll get back to it as well. You'll see now is actually the same textile that I sampled on the wallpaper. But I'm thinking a lot about like cultural artifacts, objects in the home as well, like what brought a sense of like cultural identity, what was like also I'm thinking about artificial, um, traditional, what's hand woven, what's like machine made within these blankets as well. So like what's synthetic, what's original. The same way I think people are like kind of deem like culture as well. Like, are you authentically like Guatemalan? Like, what is like the lineage? Kind of those kind of like questions. And I thought this way of working was like kind of like breaking those like kind of binaries. And I really love this like flatness and this like depth I was playing. This is a detail image of like close up of my grandma and I also coming together to hold these mirrors behind these hand cut silhouettes, um, and how that play really flattens my compositions, and also using like technical tools as like the f-stop to help really flatten the image or choose what how much I want in focus and how much I don't want in focus were really important in some of my decisions. This is kind of some behind the scenes and how I would drape the blankets behind the camera, or how I would set up the actual wallpapers in my grandmother's home. Um, my grandmother's house was also my childhood home that I was like born and raised in. So her home specifically felt really charged as a place to work throughout this project. And she was really willing to let me wallpaper her whole home, which was so nice and patient. And also work with me and collaborate with me throughout this whole time. I'd come home for like a weekend, drive up from North Carolina, for like 4.5 hour drive. And she was like, what are we doing this time? I was like, I don't know. I just brought all these images. I'm gonna cut them up. I brought all my stands, I brought my lights. And she was like, just tell me if I need to move or if you want to move anything. And yeah. Or she'd be like, tell me what outfit you want to wear. She'd go, let me go in her closet and I would pick out her like shirt to wear. Patterns also really important. So like what I'm wearing, what she wears, pattern clashing is also like kind of like a big thing that happens in like queer culture. And so the silhouettes that you see throughout these compositions, they oscillate between rigid studio, kind of like masculine portraits, but then they also are oscillate between these like flamboyant queer boy poses that I saw myself falling into as a child. When I was looking through my family's archives, I was like, that's a little queer pose. And it would be like my like waist dipping, my like hand twisting, and like I'm like posing for the camera. And I'm like, that's really cute. And how do I embrace that gesture? How do I embrace that like bodily position? And so the archive comes back through that. This one's about dancing. So I put a playlist in my for like an hour in my studio and I just set my camera on a timer. And for an hour it just photographed me dancing. I like built the stage, this like hardwood floor I got from like the thrift store, set up a backdrop, and then I found the three images that I liked, the poses, printed those out, cut them myself out, and did my same kind of process again. This was really thinking a lot about, I called it dancing in the commons because when the Spaniards came to Guatemala, they saw the Mayan indigenous people dancing in like celebratory ways, but they considered that devil worshiping. They didn't like it, and so they banned it. And I think about dancing as this like way of just expressing oneself. Also, like the dance floor is like a space where people and bodies come together and gather. And so I love dancing just as an act. But I also think body language is a really true and honest form of communication. Sometimes I think language you like can edit yourself a lot, where body language you're like, wait, why'd you twitch? Why'd you make that like move? And you're like, you read it a little bit more, even like through those unspoken gestures. I also layer my childhood portraits in these as well. So you see on the bottom right, that's me, that's my other brother doing these like same poses that we did at different times, but all kind of like happening. And so I push those within the frame. I layer things in the background. I bring my grandmother's decorations back over the wallpaper things, allowing her decision making, but also my decision making to intervene and kind of queer the domestic space where like who gets to make these decisions, and it's not always the matriarch. It's like this like blend of both, and how can we bring both of our aesthetics together? And as you may notice throughout all of this, excess and color is like abundant a lot in these compositions, and it's something that I embrace. There's this quote, I'm not going to say it's like a paragraph, but Juana Maria Rodriguez is the scholar who talks about like this queer gesture, but also as like Latinas, we're already, our bodies are excessive already, like the way we like shimmy our shoulders, sway our hips, flirt with our like eyes, speak. Like, is that pattern, noise, texture ever really necessary? It's trying to break this like this like contemporary, especially in the art world, like minimalist white gallery wall, white cube aesthetic, and it's embracing the patterns and the colors and the textures from my culture, my childhood, and allow them to be amplified and on stage. So you can see how then also through the layering of these wallpapers and these frames against the wallpaper physical space, the kind of the bodies kind of feel like there's no sort of separation between the image and the actual physical gallery space that you're in as an audience. I do think my gallery installations are a little bit more tamed, but they still definitely embrace the excess of colors and patterns, and the way they're reworked. And a lot of these, like sometimes the positioning of these bodies, like the way my grandma comes over here on the right, I told her to stand there specifically because when I was setting this up and testing, she was making lunch for me. And so she was constantly going back in and out of that space. And I had caught a frame where she was bringing like a plate over to the dining room table. And I was like, oh, this is a great space for you to like stay. And so when the time to make the image, I was like, okay, grab your favorite coffee cup and I want you to wear this shirt and this is where you're going to stand. And then this is her and her sister, when they were children in Guatemala. So again, layering the history of portraiture in on itself, the family portrait, all of these. This is one I made of my little brother. Just like things, yeah, get layered. These are some sketches. They didn't make it to the show. These weren't they're still things I was like thinking through, different ways of working. They're not necessarily reflecting textiles in these, but like this is actually reflecting the same door in that archival image, but in the contemporary modern space against its old doorknob. So I thought those ways of like working were interesting, or lining the two times together. But as you notice, the camera's never visible in any of these reflections, and that's on purpose because I don't want to show the tool on itself again. It helps with the illusion, but also I don't want to amplify the camera again. It's something that I just like choose not to highlight. So sculpture also became a part of my practice. Also, Dana, I'm not sure if I'm going over too long. Let me know. Just wave.
I was just about to send you a message. Maybe end in like 5, 6 minutes so we could have some time for questions.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. So I'll quickly go through my like sculptural stuff. This is kind of like the way I started working simultaneously, but this is a collection of all the blankets and textiles that I've collected for my family, and they erupt out of this like pile of black beans. Black beans come back again in my practice. Cyanotype is a big thing that I've been working with. Palettes as well. So I cyanotype, which is like a light sensitive solution that I coat with silk specifically, and I make these like sculptural gestures with them. The peacock feather comes in, peacock again makes these marks. Clamps also come in always. I found this clamp at a thrift store and it had a heart on top. And my thesis show is called ¿Qué dice tu corazón? Which is what does your heart say? And so I thought that was like a really amazing clamp. But I'm balancing these palettes, thinking about the instability of like imposed structures that either is like gender, navigating straight space, navigating just any structural spaces, and how that's kind of like unstable and it can collapse at any moment. I like to also use like movement and fans within that to like allow the fabrics to come to life. These are the same patterns that I'm reweaving and re-imprinting on these things. I've done residencies at Storm King Art Center where I've done similar things to practice, working with risographs, playing with clamps, making building new forms. And then I've been able to like work and build my own aluminum casts, molds of some of these actual clamps and like the tools that I'm using that I'm hoping I'm actually working on a show right now where I'm going to incorporate some of these back into the space as well as objects. I, of course, found a palette to balance during this residency, and this one kind of acts as a sail. This is a new iteration of how I've installed some of this work here in Provincetown. And instead of the wallpaper, I printed my patterns on satin to allow the wall to feel like it's like melting and to drape and also to clamp back on into the photograph space itself. That's it. Let's stop sharing my screen.
Oh, wow. I never thought I was gonna have or hear Pokemon and Digimon pop up in your presentation. I was like, "Whoa, okay, cool. There's Digimon." Deep call.
Right. I love Digimon.
Yeah, is this still on? Is Digimon still happening? Does anybody
I
know?
think so. I think they actually came out with a new season. I haven't seen it. They tried remaking like the first season,
Yeah.
but it was kind of bad. Um, I watched it, I was like, this is so childlike. It's like, hi, I'm Agumon. And it's like, whoa, I was a kid.
Yeah, I had been a kid. Yeah. All right, I have a couple of questions, but I'd like to turn it over to everybody else first. And so, yeah, we have a few minutes for questions. So feel free to ask Dominic your questions. All right, I'll start then.
Oh, I have a question.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. Okay, go ahead, Nicole.
First off, amazing, amazing photographs, sculptures. You were really talented. That was really nice to sit through and hear your story through your art.
Thank you.
I did have a question about, you mentioned one of the series of your photos, the one with the smudges on the face.
Hmm.
And you mentioned that someone gave you some constructive criticism on it. I was wondering, when taking that criticism, um, how to apply it properly. Is there sometimes with art where you're like, um, but I want to do this, but this other person is saying this, and I wonder how you kind of solve that issue.
Can I
Yeah.
can I before you answer that, can I jump in because I love that question, Nicole? And the flip side of that is when you had it sounds like a professor say, "Hey, just pick one camera."
Mm.
So there was a time where you like rejected that criticism. There was another time where you accepted that criticism. So yeah.
Yeah.
So Nicole's question,
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah. It's a good question. I think the way I do it, I'll listen, always listen and like try to like receive that. And then I will either try. to take it and like apply it. And sometimes by just like trying it, it's like, and then seeing what like resonates more. Because it's like, okay, well, I did try that way of working, and maybe I don't actually like it. And I kind of, with the camera thing, I was like, all right, let me try to limit myself and just do like a film camera. And I was like, I can't, this way of working is just isn't speaking to me. And I just had to go back to the way I was working. The like the smudge ones, I kind of rejected her criticism at first because I was like, well, people enjoy this, and I was like, okay, but it's becoming redundant, and I was also getting bored of some like the ways I was doing it, and I was like, oh, it works for like one or two of the images, and but not for these other ones, and so I was like, okay, could you sit me down? And I think I was a little against it because I was like, well, I'm not a painter, I don't really know how to do this, so this feels like a whole like learning curve, but she gave me the time and the patience to teach me. Like one day she just like sat me down and was like, just start off with like she poured out a tube of like brown paint and was like, I went and got me like a blank sheet of paper and would like she's like, just take two fingers or a finger and make single marks and move on and just like do that. And so it was kind of like a quick little boot camp. Um, and so I think ultimately you should just try it, receive it, hear it out. If it's something that's like kind of goes against like your morals, your ethics, obviously then like reject that, like stay true to yourself. But the ways I think we can grow is by allowing someone receiving something, attempting it and seeing their perspective and ultimately making your decision from that. Because it's like, okay, well, I did try that, and I actually like the way I was doing it before, and I think it fits more of my concept, my theme, and yeah, the ways of working.
That's good insight. Yeah, I'm a creative writing major, so that's another how to apply that as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Like,
like, what do I choose to leave out, leave in? Like, which characters? And sometimes it's okay. Well, if I remove this character from the story, how does that change it? And sometimes it's like, ooh, that's like a little mystery. But then you add it back in, you're like, okay, and maybe I see what they mean.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's an epic question. Thank you, Nicole. Who else? Don't be shy. We have limited amount of time. I got questions. All right, Dominic, you utilized your archive a ton, like your personal image archive. I just have a logistical question, like how do you sort and catalog all that stuff for yourself in a way that it's useful to yourself, or do you just kind of stumble across like, oh, I found this image, I guess I'll use this? Like you have like tons of fabric scraps and now like printed paper scraps. Yeah, I could like, and you utilize it in your work, and I see images come back, maybe like a decade later.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I organize everything through like file structures. So like all of my like digital images, my scans and stuff, I usually like have a whole like folder system that like gets archived that way. As working as a commercial photographer, I had to like come up with a whole data asset management system for a company to find images. So I found it very beneficial for myself to also have some type of organization to it. But sometimes that always doesn't happen. Like I just have a folder that's like scans, family photo, baby photos, and it's like I'll go home and I'll like photograph or like scan my family's like photo albums because sometimes my grandma's like, "Don't take that out of the house. Like you're not bringing that with you to school. That's staying here." And I was like, "Okay, respect." I will, and so I would just like bring my scanner or my camera and I'll like take high res images of it, and I'll just like leave them in a folder, and I'll like come back to them and use them, print them. The textiles, obviously, like since working with them, my grandma, I've had more conversations with my grandma, and she just keeps them stored away in like a thing. And so she was like, you can use them. She was like, she hasn't like given them to me, but I have them all in this like bin back there where they're like all folded and I take care of them. And I'm never destroying them because I'm always photographing them and altering the reproduction of it. So they just become samples. And I'm slowly working this way where I'm doing research on like when I was at UNC, I looked at their like rare book library and I was using drawing illustrations of like old Mesoamerican textiles, and those eventually I'm hoping to like bring into my practice more. Did just some type of organization
Got
helps.
it. Yeah. Who else? Questions for Dominic? I could keep going.
I like sort of had a question. So I realized that this is a photography class, but I did really like your sculpture. And I don't know if you touched on it. Um, you might have, and I might have just missed it. What drew you to like palettes? The like wooden
Yeah. Yeah, everyone always asks me that. Okay, so I was coming back from winter break at grad school and there was this palette outside. It was really nice. I was like, that's a really nice palette. It was like clean, nice wood. And it was sitting outside. 2 weeks passed, it's still sitting outside. And I was like, this poor palette, let me bring it inside. And it had these like corners on it, and it kind of resembled like a frame. So I was like, oh, maybe I could put a picture in there and like mount it for one of my photographs and display it in the gallery wall that way. But some of my challenges of like moving into like a more sculptural 3D space is that I always end up making sculptures that are flat. And so I'm like, I need to like make a 3D object. And that would have reinforced that same like two dimension. And then my spring cleanse, I was like, I just want to like balance it, like thinking about like teetering. And so I was just like in the studio late one night with one of my spring clamps. I have like this big one. And I just like, I got it to a point, I found this like right move and I just like held in place. And I was like, I just was like, wow, that feels so magical and like an illusion. Like everyone's like, oh, there's like something holding it up. But I'm like, no, it's just because of that like one point of balance. And it's just like this precariousness. I got really into this idea of like precarious things, assemblages, things stacking, stack of cards. It's always like, oh, it can collapse at any moment. Um, and so that became a way of working or using a palette. But I was also thinking, like, after I did that, I was like, okay, what does this like mean more? And I'm thinking about shipping pallets as how like goods are brought to us across borders, across oceans, through migration that like kind of resembles migration. The pallet can stand in for the body instead of the body being physically present or like a figure, the body can be the pallet. And so then the draping becomes like also another like queer gesture where like it resists straightness and gets to fall into this like soft curve. And it's like two pallets coming together to hold hands, thinking about how one helps each other out. Um, so that's kind of how palettes have entered my practice. And I'm trying to find ways to challenge myself currently to transform the palettes, like destroy it, pattern it up, engrave them. I don't know. I had a visit one time and an artist was like, it's too much of a palette still. Transform it. And so that's my current challenge.
Awesome. If they're cold, if you're cold, they're cold. Bring them in.
Right, exactly.
Anyone else have a question for Dominic? Dominic, I have a very silly question and then a more serious question. The silly one is, has any of these palettes fallen over? Has any, like, you walked into the gallery one day and were like, oh, whoops.
Yeah, actually, during a job interview recently, I was on a Zoom interview and the palette, it's like the one right here to right behind me. I was here and I was like introducing myself and I was like, hi, my name is Dominique, blah, blah, blah. And also I was like, well, bam, and it like smacked. And I mean, it didn't hit me, it just like fell behind. And I was like, oh, my palette just fell. Um, it was great though. I think it like actually was like a memorable thing because I ended up becoming a finalist for the job. And so I'm like still waiting to hear back, but like the palette didn't necessarily like they weren't like, oh, not as serious and it wasn't stable. Like
Right,
I
yeah.
think it added a lot more like human aspects to it. It's like, okay, like he's just like this is his studio, he's just working. Like nothing is perfect, nothing's gonna be like pristine and clean and blah blah blah. Like things happen and mistakes happen. But yeah, never in the gallery. I've only installed it once in the gallery and it was fine. But I'm actually scared about installing these in the galleries because people get really close. Like even in when I have open studios here, people are like drinking and they like come in, they're like, what is this? And I'm like, whoa, 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 careful. It's like this will fall on you.
Epic. And then my slightly more serious question: you're mining your family's history archive, and you just mentioned that you're like branching outside of that with like the antique books and whatnot. But for the family history archive, it's a finite thing, and it's built through time. And I was curious how heavy on your heart or mind or soul or whatever you're adding to that archive? Like, what are you leaving behind so that someone down the line might be like, oh, like I found this in Dominic's closet or something, right? Or like they were just storing this, and like, do you feel that like in your daily life, like, oh yeah, this will someday become the sacred favorite mug or whatever, right? I'll be Abuelo's favorite mug or something.
Yeah. I think so. I think a lot of my silk fabrics that I'm making and like cyanotyping, like those, I think they get added into the same piles as like my like textiles that my grandmother's given me, and so I think the archive kind of like stacks that way. Even my own images that I'm making, like I consider them like my like art practice, my fine art stuff, and maybe they may not be in the same like family photo album, but I think as a collection of like photos and images, they all kind of come together. I can show you guys real quick what I'm doing. But I learned to basket weave the other week. And so I'm making this basket for a show. It looks crazy right now, but so I think stuff like this will come, and then I'm reincorporating my cyanotype fabrics into the work in that way. So then these objects will eventually be scattered and around the home. Um, and so I think about them in that way as well, like the same way that my like grandmother collects objects, even when they're like touristy things that I didn't know until recently. It's like, oh, this just says Cancun, Mexico. I thought this was like a Guatemalan tchotchke. She was like, no, I got that when I went to Cancun for vacation when you were a kid. And I was like, I didn't realize that. But it's like those objects that you like put so much value onto and you're like imprint all these things. Um, I don't think I actively think about it, to be honest, but I think it's like something that I'm just like always accumulating in my work. And the same way that my grandma has like accumulated stuff, and my mother has accumulated stuff, and I've like been like, ooh, and gravitated towards it, and they've been like, why? Now they like see and understand. I think that will maybe happen in the future. At least I hope. Someone will
Yeah.
find appreciation for it.
I did not time this intentionally. I'd like to say that I did, but we're just starting. We're in the middle of a photo series called Sacred Sites, where the students are like photographing or figuring out how to photographically communicate a site, whatever that means for them, that is sacred. And so, yeah, this is like resonating quite well, actually.
Oh, that's great. Exciting.
Okay, any last question before we let Dominique go? Cool. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. It's awesome that so many of you could join us live. Thank you, Dominic, so much. That was wild. I really, really appreciate getting to see a better look at your work and like behind the scenes and stuff. I didn't realize that your grandma figured so largely in the process, and she is adorable and badass.
Yeah. I love her. She's my favorite.
Oh. All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care,
So good.
everyone.
Bye.
See ya. See ya. See ya.
Thanks for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.